I call to order the public hearing for Bylaw 6265, Municipal Development Plan. I will first read the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also the home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. The procedure for this hearing will be: City Council has scheduled 4 days for public hearings for the Municipal Development Plan. The topics for today will focus on the background, the community profile, local economy, arts, culture and heritage, and relationships policies. We will begin by calling upon a member of the Municipal Development Plan team to provide the background to the case. Anyone else who wishes to speak on this bylaw will then be called upon. We will then ask 3 times if there is anybody else who wishes to make a presentation. City Council will then have the opportunity to ask questions of any of the presenters. The hearing will then be adjourned for the day and will continue tomorrow. In order to ensure that the matter being discussed is given due process and aligns with the principles of natural justice and procedural fairness, the best practice is for members of City Council to refrain from communicating in any capacity about this matter with members of the public until the vote of the bylaw has taken place. City Council's decision should be based on the information that is read, heard, and discussed as part of the public hearing. In that way, all members of City Council are privy to the same information, received at the same time, that has been vetted through debate, and that there is a shared and equal understanding of the matter at hand. I will now call upon Maureen Gehring, Okay. All right, we'll do a roll call first to make sure everybody's here. Councillor Campbell?
Here.
Councillor Carlson?
Present.
Councillor Kaufman?
Present.
Councillor Croson?
Present.
Councillor Morrow?
Yep.
Councillor Parker?
Yep.
Councillor Higgin?
Present.
Councillor Mayashiro?
Here.
Councillor Mayor Spearman? Present. All members of council are in attendance at the public hearing. Thank you. I will now call upon Maureen Gehring, Manager of Planning, to provide the background to the case.
Okay, good afternoon, Your Worship and members of City Council. The MDP project team is very happy to be presenting on the draft MDP this afternoon and for the next 3 afternoons. Next slide, please. So we will have several of the MDP project teams speak this afternoon, and we have organized the presentation as you can see on the slide. Okay, as the MDP project sponsor, I will start us off. Next slide, please. Every journey has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the MDP process is no different. So let's start with the destination. Next slide, please. In contemplating a review of the existing ICSP MDP, the project team was very thoughtful and deliberate. That the new MDP needed to be rooted in the place called Sikokotok or Lethbridge. The MDP is a long-term plan. By its nature and place in the statutory plan hierarchy, it isn't designed to solve immediate problems, but rather sets outcomes, goals, and policies for the community to achieve its vision of who and what it wants to be. On the slide is a list of questions that the project team asked itself, finishing up with the why and 2 great quotes that we found regarding the importance of planning in any journey. Next slide, please. Once the project team understood the destination, which was an MDP that reflected this place and the aspirations of those in it. We looked for data that would inform us and provide support to the contents of the plan. The SSRP Compliance Initiative and the 100K Conversations Project gave us a valuable head start. In terms of the engagement with the community, both formal stakeholders and informal chats in places like Galt Gardens and Henderson Pool. Next slide, please. Once the project team had a sense of the collected baseline data, we strategized on the process for developing the plan. Understanding that staff had already compiled a good proportion of the supporting data and had participated in other corporate master plans, it was felt insourcing the project would give us the best value. At a workshop in January of 2019 with City Council, it was confirmed that the bones of the current ICSP MDP were good. The vision was still relevant. And all of the good work done in the past number of years by staff, the community, and council should be put to good use when reviewing the plan. Council did decide against using a subcommittee format for this project, and I mention that only for context as to why the draft policies were not shared with the community or stakeholders before they were shared with council in the draft document we are discussing today. So even though considerable work has been accomplished in the last number of years, there were still some gaps that needed to be filled in terms of conversations and additional information. A communications plan was developed, but due to the situation with COVID, we were fortunate enough to transition to a digital format and keep the project on schedule. Pulling the document together in terms of organizing all of the content will be expanded upon later in the presentation, but that did signal for us the home stretch of the journey. Next slide, please. The draft MDP is a fulsome document. Once the project team got the content organized, we edited it purposely, ensuring the document or destination was what was envisioned 3 slides ago. This is a long-range planning document that not only lays a foundation to be built upon, but provides guidance and rationale for decision makers and all those of our community who call this place home. So as I turn the presentation over to our project manager, Byron Bazunas, to speak about the schedule of the MDP sections over the next 4 days, I just wanted to mention to Council, we're looking forward to the question and answer component of the hearing, and we have worked out a system where I would appreciate if any questions came to myself firstly, just for some general context, and then I can redirect to specific members of the planning team who worked on that particular section, and also our city colleagues from other departments who are joining us today, which we appreciate very much, both for their knowledge and their support. So I will pass it over to Byron. Next slide, please.
Gotta unmute myself, of course. Thank you very much for having us here. This is the culmination of over 2 years worth of work now. And I'm quite proud of our project team. And so I will tell you a little bit about what we were able to achieve. A project like this normally would have been hired out to a consulting company and perhaps would have cost in the range of $1 million. We have been able to complete the work internally and are likely have saved in the range of $250,000 to $500,000 in getting the work done. That's a great accomplishment, but I think from the quality of the document and the outcomes and the knowledge that our own staff have of the community, it makes the quality of this document quite a bit better than anything we could have expected from an outside consultant. So I'd just like to congratulate our team for a job well done. The mayor already talked to us a little bit about the scheduling over the next 4 days. Today we will be talking about the first sections of the MDP, sections 1 through 4, the background and community profile, local economy, arts, culture, heritage, and relationship policies. Tuesday, we will be discussing section 5, transportation, utilities, servicing, as well as the environment policies. Wednesday, the 31st, we will again talk a little bit more about Section 5 with community well-being, housing, and places policies. And finally, on Thursday, we will talk about implementation and the other bits and pieces appended to the end of the document, and also have another chance to discuss anything that came up before but didn't get fully vetted. And that takes us to the end of my short one-slide presentation. So I'll just pass it on to our subject matter experts and writers. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Byron. Sheila Graham here. I get to go first today and this week, I guess. So quickly to recap, there are a number of building blocks that form the foundation of this MDP, including the current ICSP MDP. The vision statement continues to resonate and is carried forward. The existing policy areas are also carried forward with a new role. Many successful capital projects over the past 10 years have informed this new document, as well as Council's current strategic plan, which identifies a number of key priorities. Recent planning documents and studies, as well as recent wide-ranging and extensive engagement through the 100K conversations. Next slide, please. To strengthen this foundation, we've added a few more building blocks. We've focused on including relevant data, reflecting the community pulse on issues, shifting to subject matter policies, accessible policy directions, and implementation and performance measurement. Next slide, please. These are the 7 document sections in the updated MDP. And on the next slide, today I'm here to speak to the introductory and background sections, giving you a sense of how each of these sections works with and supports the policies you'll find in the MDP. And then we'll get into discussion on 3 of the policy sections. Much of what is included in the first 4 sections of the document is the kind of background information you would expect to find at the start of any planning or policy document, but I'll highlight some of the key or unique elements for Lethbridge and for this MDP. Next slide. The introduction to the MDP section describes where the MDP fits within the legislative hierarchy. The SSRP, the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan, has both encouraged and required us to think regionally, and you'll see that reflected throughout the MDP and its policies. We've made deliberate choices in language throughout the MDP policies. Tyson will speak more to this as we get into the policy sections, but you'll note that the words ensure, promote, and support are used to begin each policy. These words aren't intended to imply that some policies are more important than others, or that a certain policy will necessarily be implemented before another. Ensure policies indicate actions that are highly aligned with topics within the city's jurisdiction, or that have been identified as priorities through council direction, for example, through council's strategic plan. Policies that begin with the word promote indicate policies that are strongly aligned with the MDP's vision and outcomes, but for which the actions to be taken may fall outside of the city's direct jurisdiction or control. Policies that begin with the word support are often policies that address topics identified as high priorities for and by the community, but for which decision-making and/or implementation fall outside of the city's jurisdiction or overall control. It's important to keep in mind that this is a long-term plan and that these are long-term actions. We're thinking about a city of 150,000. This isn't tomorrow. The MDP doesn't establish specific timeframes for actions to be completed. It could be 10 years or more before all the policies are fully implemented. At the same time, we are interested in implementability. Is that a word? Who will be doing these things? If there wasn't a clear way for the city to action a policy recommendation, we worked with business units to revise it. Next slide, please. In considering the community vision for the MDP, once we've shifted our perspective to see the ICSP MDP's 6 policy areas as the overall outcomes we're trying to achieve, we were able to identify many statements within that document that work to illustrate and describe these outcomes. Next slide. Section 3 of the MDP describes the approach and process used to review the MDP. On this slide, you can see some of the key milestones and activities over the past 2 years. In some ways, one bullet that could be lit with flashing lights and highlighted with colorful stars is the second one, the review of recent studies, plans, and reports. As Maureen said, we are building on and leveraging past and ongoing conversations in the community. In the category of ongoing long-term planning activities, the Rec and Culture Master Plan and the Transportation Master Plan are a couple of examples. These projects have also been doing topic-specific and focused engagement that the MDP can consider and elevate to a higher policy level. We've been in regular conversation with these project managers to ensure we're all working together and moving in the same direction. In terms of leveraging recent work, we looked at the 100K Conversations initiative. Through this initiative, planning and other business units had literally thousands of conversations with individual citizens and groups. For planning, these conversations were critical in developing the 4 South Saskatchewan Regional Plan Compliance Initiative reports, which made many recommendations regarding possible MDP policies. We've gathered these recommendations, analyzed them to determine whether the MDP is, in fact, the place to address them, refined those that were a good fit for MDP policy, and have brought these forward for your consideration. In discussion with Council at the kickoff workshop, and as we reviewed recent and ongoing work, we identified a few topics where we felt additional information from partners, stakeholders, or the public was needed. And for these, we carried out additional engagement. Next slide, please. This table highlights the specific engagement that was carried out in reviewing the MDP. In planning engagement with Indigenous partners and community, we turned to the city's Indigenous Relations Advisor for, well, advice. A series of conversations took place, beginning with pre-engagement discussions with administration from Kainai, Piikani, Siksika, and Lethbridge Métis, as well as with the Reconciliation Lethbridge Advisory Committee. From there, discussion workshops were planned with elders and community members before circling back to administration. As we review individual policy sections this week, you'll hear how the knowledge and perspectives shared through these conversations has been integrated into MDP policy. Another focused conversation that had broad reach was on the topic of housing. Council will recall that in the spring of 2020, engagement activities took place to guide the implementation of land use planning related recommendations from the Municipal Housing Strategy. MDP policies, shaped by what we heard through these activities, will set the stage for implementation. We also had the opportunity to check the community pulse more generally at 2 Get Involved Lethbridge community conversations and through an online survey regarding policy objectives. Following these activities, partners and stakeholder organizations were invited to speak directly to Council through a series of CIC meetings this past fall. As policies were drafted, we were constantly checking in with business unit managers and with the managers of ongoing long-term planning projects like that Rec and Culture Master Plan and the Transportation Master Plan to ensure alignment and a certain level of comfort. Next slide, please. The big question for the community profile section was what to include. As we all know, there's almost unlimited information, stories, and data that could describe Lethbridge as a city and a community. We really wanted to tie the information provided in the community profile to the MDP outcomes. What do we need to understand about Lethbridge if we're trying to achieve these outcomes? We organized the information into the 5 subsections you see here. For the subsection called Story of this Place and Its People, the use of the word story rather than history was intentional. This subsection is not bounded by time, and its Tapi have called this place home since time immemorial, and the story of Indigenous people in this place continues into the future. This section benefited greatly from constructive critique provided by members of the Reconciliation Lethbridge Advisory Committee. We are very grateful for their time and effort. Mike Bruised in particular spent hours reviewing drafts and in conversation. The specific stories and information shared here are not by any stretch the only things the city as an organization and as a community needs to know about the background and experiences of Indigenous people in Lethbridge. Our hope is that it provides context for the policies that follow in the MDP and that it provides openings for many more conversations going forward. By contrast, the subsection that discusses the history of urban development begins with a specific event, the founding of coal banks in 1882. Rather than a retelling of historic events in Lethbridge, this section speaks to how the city has been physically shaped and developed over the past 140 years. In the community profile section, you'll also find data regarding aspects of Lethbridge's current population demographics, development patterns, and economy. This information provides a snapshot of a point in time. In the case of development patterns, the data included here highlights some of the substantial analysis that was carried out as part of the Efficient Land Use Strategy for the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan Compliance Initiative. The community profile is also where the MDP first introduces some of the global and local opportunities and challenges that Lethbridge will need to consider in the coming generations. The section also includes projections regarding what these demographic, development, economic, climatic, and social trends could imply for the future. In order to understand where Lethbridge could go, it's helpful to understand aspects of its past, present, and what's seen on the horizon at this time. Overall, the information presented in the community profile is intended to provide context for the policies that follow. Next up, Tyson Boylan will take you through the local economy policy section.
All right, thank you very much, Sheila. I'm Tyson Boylan. Can I have the next slide, please? All right, so we'll now get into the policies and how they are structured, and then we'll close off with discussion of our first policy topic of the week with local economy. Next slide, please. So we identified 9 policy topics a few slides back, but each of these policy topics are divided into subsections. For example, the local economy topic is divided into subsections like fiscal responsibility and innovation. Each subsection has a stated policy objective and has policies that help it to meet this objective. These policies are then followed by directions, which are more prescriptive in nature, as they describe the work that actually needs to be done in order to meet this objective. Next slide, please. So note about the wording of the policies, as Sheila went through a few slides ago, policies have been divided into 3 levels of policy intent. Ensure is the most rigorous. Promote means that a specified action will make the desired result more likely, and support is the most passive policy intent term here. Next slide, please. So we'll go into the local economy topic as our first topic of the day. The economy takes a much more prominent position in the proposed MDP than in the existing MDP. So much so that it has its very own policy section devoted just to this topic. For better or for worse, we don't have much of an energy sector in Lethbridge. The new MDP has extensively examined the economy, recognizing that Lethbridge is very different in this regard than the rest of Alberta is. So this section looks at what economic advantages that set us apart. Over the past few years, our GDP has grown at a rate higher than both the province and the nation as a whole, and we have a relatively diverse and stable economy. That being said, the retail and commercial sector everywhere is currently undergoing tremendous upheaval at this time, more so than 11 years ago when the current MDP was adopted. Ongoing economic changes have also been accelerated by the ongoing pandemic as well. This MDP tries to make sense of this and how this will impact the economics of land development patterns within future years. Small and local business was also looked at as part of our background information. Small businesses tend to pay a large share of property tax, drive local employment, and a large portion of the revenue stays in the community. However, small businesses can be quite vulnerable to unexpected changes, as we have seen with COVID. Skilled employment is also something that could be better utilized in the community. Every year, many post-secondary students graduate, but then find opportunities elsewhere and then leave the community. This knowledge is a resource, and it is one that this MDP looks at better realizing to its full potential. An overarching theme in this MDP is the relationship with Indigenous people. This is a theme that is not limited to one policy topic, and the economic topic is no different here. This topic looks at some of the economic linkages in this relationship. And finally, the city's relationship with the airport recently changed as we have taken over its operation. This MDP also addresses the economic implications of this dynamic. Next slide, please. So the local economy is our first subsection, and the local economy sounds a little bit redundant here, but this section looks at the economy in general. The objective for this subsection is to explore and develop economic partnerships and ensure that we have an adequate supply of industrial and commercial land. This objective is a result of shared aspirations identified in the guiding documents that are listed here, in particular the commercial and industrial study and the SSRP economy and tourism inventory were looked at in writing these policies. Next slide, please. Some of the feedback that we received from the community at large involved trying to attract new businesses and creating an environment for this to happen in. We consulted with Economic Development Lethbridge about the economy topic of this document just over 1 year ago. And the biggest takeaway from this meeting was the suggested synergies between what we were trying to accomplish through the MDP and EDL 6 pillars to build and diversify the local economy. This provided us with much guidance. So in response to this background information and these conversations, this MDP identified that, that we have an existing strength as we are a hub of food processing and that we will still see growth in the sector. The agricultural sector is a steady, mature economic driver for us. The MDP also identified that we are a hub of post-secondary education as a strength. Knowledge-based industries aren't as mature as the agri-food business is here, but have tremendous potential for growth in our community. So this subsection contains policies to harness this growth and to attract and retain skilled employment. There's also a policy to continually monitor commercial development trends to better adapt to changing economic conditions. Next slide, please. So for fiscal responsibility, the objective is to ensure that the ongoing development of the community contributes to our fiscal sustainability over the long term. Again, there are shared aspirations identified in the guiding documents listed here, particularly the financial stewardship section of the strategic plan, which discussed reviewing the budget process to ensure a sustainable financial future. Next slide, please. Through our engagement, we heard that some people wanted to see financial and bureaucratic efficiencies addressed in this MDP. So based on this subsection includes policies that look to balance taxes and fees with demand for services and to be financially flexible. This involves soliciting feedback from the public on the budget and on servicing levels. This subsection also discusses the provision of infrastructure efficiently by completing neighborhoods prior to further infrastructure investment. This does mean limiting new development fronts in the future. However, I will say that this policy allows for already existing approved outline plans to continue development as they have been. There are still a number of years of development under these existing outline plans, some of which, such as Block 2 in the north and the Piers and Watermark in the west, have not even begun development yet. Next slide, please. So economic linkages with Indigenous people. The objective here is to improve existing linkages and to form new ones. In terms of background documents, the strategic plan spoke about developing shared leadership with the Indigenous community, and the economy and tourism inventory also touched on Indigenous-owned businesses too. Next slide. From our feedback, we found that Lethbridge is an essential service hub for our First Nations neighbours, just like it is for other communities like in Coaldale or Raymond. Likewise, Lethbridge is a large recipient of spending from these First Nations, accounting for $66 million per year from the Kainai First Nation alone, according to a 2007 study. We also found that while Indigenous-owned enterprises face various hurdles, they are also emerging in Canada. 76% reported a profit in 2015, compared with 61% in 2010. In response to all this, the MDP contains policies to collaborate with Indigenous service agencies of First Nations to increase business and employment opportunities both in the community at large and while interacting with the organization of the City of Lethbridge. Next slide, please. So tourism and hospitality is also a topic that this MDP addressed, with the objective to bolster our existing strengths while exploring new avenues such as Indigenous tourism, hosting large events like convention, and hosting arts and cultural events. Shared aspirations We now have a destination management plan that was approved a couple of years ago that investigated our tourism strengths and weaknesses and proposed policies to expand our tourism sector. The River Valley Parks Master Plan also considered ways to better utilize the River Valley for attracting tourism, as it is one of our local gems. Next slide, please. So in the community, there was an express need to broaden our tourism horizons to include food tourism, which is a burgeoning sector of this market. There's also the desire expressed to better promote Indigenous culture and events, such as the International Peace Powwow, to the broader national and international tourism market. The resulting policies looked at the use of the River Valley for Indigenous and ecotourism, ensuring that a fresh food market could potentially be established in an essential area of the city, and ensuring that hospitality uses can be established in underserved areas of the city if they are proposed by private industry. Next slide, please. So the airport and its economic impact. The objective here is to realize the economic importance of the airport lands for both aviation-related activities, like more frequent flights or better terminal facilities, and non-aviation activities like increased development at the airport business park. So for shared aspirations, improvements to the airport are mentioned in a few background documents, including Council's strategic plan, which clearly set out a goal of revitalizing the airport to expand economic opportunity. The airport master plan from 2018-2019 is also very detailed, which was especially relevant to informing the subsection of this MDP. Next slide, please. Revitalization of the airport was seen as an important economic issue through our stakeholder feedback that we received as well. So putting it all together, the current MDP was adopted in 2010, and at that time, the airport was controlled by the county. The city's role then was more of a stakeholder. As the city now operates the airport, we now have the ability to better control its economic destiny. As a piece of transportation infrastructure, the increased development of the airport will support the economic development of the community as a whole. There's also the second part of this, which is the commercial and industrial development of the adjacent business park. This MDP calls for consideration of this development in relation to our commercial and industrial land base within the rest of the city. Next slide, please. So finally, our last subsection, the economy topic, which is innovation. The objective here is to explore opportunities for Lethbridge to become an increasingly economically diverse and future-thinking community. Council's strategic plan was one report that fed into the subsection as it committed to strengthening broadband access in the city. The economy and tourism inventory also investigated solar energy generation within the city as well. Next slide, please. Like with what Council stated, a common theme from stakeholder engagement was also the importance of better broadband internet connectivity. Post-secondary institutions were also seen as places that could be better utilized as innovation hubs. So the policies of the innovation section try to pull this all together. Businesses and institutions increasingly need greater bandwidth, as do home users, as we've seen over this past year for many of us, I'm sure. This MDP considers broadband as an essential piece of infrastructure. Like with the first subsection, this one also considers increased support of the commercialization of knowledge. Here, though, is more focused on supporting our post-secondary institutions in this pursuit. The potential for solar energy farms on vacant or underutilized parcels or site-specific solar panels was also explored here. Next slide, please. Oh, and that concludes the discussion on the economy topic. I'm not sure if we want to stop here for questions or continue on.
What's the wish of council? See any hands?
Probably for questions after every section, eh?
Okay, so we can ask questions now?
Sure, yep.
I think it'll be easier to organize that way.
Okay. Questions from council. Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Mayor Sperman. Appreciate all the information and presentations again. Just curious about, this is just about process, because this is sort of like deja vu all over again. Council went through some of this previously, then we had to reschedule. I've got all my notes here, but I don't remember all the questions I asked and the answers I received verbatim. Probably through you, Mr. Mayor, to the city solicitor or city clerk, is there any way to make the minutes of our previous meeting form part of this presentation so we don't have to plow old ground, so to speak, or is it necessary that we ask the exact same questions that we asked previously?
We have an answer to the question?
So the hearing that we previously held did not occur at all because it does not count because we didn't advertise it correctly. So in effect, we're starting all over again.
Okay, and so we can't even bring forward the minutes or questions and stuff that were asked previously to this.
It never occurred.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Just maybe a follow-up then on process. Did the motions that I proposed after the following meeting that didn't occur, did they not occur either, or are they sitting somewhere safely?
Any motions that were presented at a council meeting would still be viewed as could be considered as part of the process.
Okay, so the questions that I've submitted or the motions I've submitted already are still in the queue, so to speak, to be deliberated at council.
So if they did not come to council, they didn't occur. So we do have a record of them in case you wish to bring those back up. But if discussion didn't occur at council, then no.
Discussion hasn't occurred at council, but we also delayed the process. I just want to make sure I don't have to resubmit the motions. You've got them on record, right?
So what we'll do is we'll send them back to you, and then you can resubmit them to confirm that those are the ones you want.
Excellent, thank you. Then questions that I've not previously asked, page or policy 28 on page 100. So by process, Ms. Gehring, I'll direct these to you. I have to find it myself. That is it's under innovation.
Under innovation?
Thank you, yes. Policy 28 is identified as a support the growth in renewable energy generation by, and then it's exploring and considering. However, council does have a directive, I believe, time's all melded together. I believe that we did pass a policy directive regarding energy reduction by the corporation by 2040. Was it 40% or something like that? It was very aggressive, but it's definitely doable. But these are policy 28 is identified as a support. Why would that not be and ensure, since we have a policy on the books?
Right, so policy 28 also refers to private land, Councillor Kaufman, not city-owned land. So we're not in control of what somebody may want to do with their farmland, right? Whereas we would be in control of a city-owned piece of land, but not a private piece of farmland. So we actually can't ensure that happening, but we would definitely support any private landowner that we're looking to explore that, as it may be many years before their farmland could be actually developed. So that's what that policy refers to.
Okay, thank you very much. Just in terms of organization, and I like what Mr. Boylan did in the presentation, as he headed into the policies, he inserted a slide that reminded us of ensure, promote, and support. And I'm just wondering if it's possible to include that on page 85, just as a reminder, because currently it's sitting on page 15. It would be nice to have just the reminder as we head into the policies as to what encourage, promote, and support. I'll throw that as certainly as a suggestion, because it would make, I think, the reading through a little bit easier. I'm wondering if you can just clarify the statement. It's on page 93. I'm looking on an iPhone because my screen turns off on my iPad if I jump back and forth. Under fiscal responsibility, and it's just the objective statement. The objective of these policies is to guarantee that the ongoing development of the community contributes to its long-term fiscal sustainability. Can you just expand upon that as to what exactly that objective means?
Certainly. So I'll start, and I don't know if Mr. Bazunas or Mr. Hawkins also wants to weigh in. I think it's there's been numerous cases of municipalities that have invested taxpayer grant money in infrastructure that actually never gets developed. So I guess what we're looking for with this policy is getting clearer direction in terms of investments of money for capital infrastructure and how best to balance that in terms of areas developing and what we may see in terms of tax returns coming back. So it's just a balancing, actually, a balancing act, I guess, in a way. But we would just want to make sure the current MDP really doesn't have any guidance in that regard as to how we should be fiscally responsible. And so this section just sort of puts the idea out there that this is something that we need to be concerned with. The details, of course, can be further worked out. That was the intent of the section.
Okay, thank you. I'll step out of line and hop back in, Mayor Spearman. Thank you.
Councillor Crowson? Councillor Crowson?
Did something freeze somewhere?
Your name was in the queue. Did you have a question?
I don't know. Mayor Spearman?
Is something frozen?
I see Janessa's mic is muted, if that matters.
Yeah, that could be why we can't hear him.
Somebody wants
And
to
we have to redo the MDP a third time.
No.
Where
Can
is he?
David Sarsfield hear us?
And unfortunately, chat is turned off, so I can't even send a message.
Was Councillor Crowson going to ask a question or not?
I'll send a text to the mayor.
I can hear that there's
While we're on a pause,
communication
those of you who
issues.
can hear me, my internet has been spotty again, and so if I disappear, I may have to phone in. So just give me some patience there, or have some patience with me, please.
Is
Is anyone watching the YouTube link?
Yeah, that would be a bit weird, wouldn't it?
Oh.
There's 5 people watching currently.
I'm just wondering.
Yeah, one of them's Jeff Carlson, apparently.
I'm just wondering if anyone knows if it's working. Is all.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant you were watching yourself.
No. But that way we'd know if they're running around madly.
Tara just texted that she can hear us on YouTube, so the audio's going out.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
We could do
Okay, I was asking if Councillor Crowson had a question.
Thank you. Yes, we were wondering if we had disconnected there for a bit. I do have a question, and I was paying attention, so I'll direct it to Ms. Gearing and then see if we need to have other people answer it. And you may have heard this question before because I feel like I've asked it a couple of weeks ago. On page 97, we have a discussion about nature-based adventure and ecotourism. For my better understanding, can you explain what nature-based adventure will be and how will we do that within an environmentally sustainable manner?
So thank you, Councillor Crowson. I will respond, and then if Tyson has anything to add, Mr. Boylan, he can finish up. Nature-based adventure and ecotourism has to do with designing activities that actually leave a small footprint on the land. So nothing that incurs a lot of infrastructure, a lot of building, leaving the natural environment and ecosystem in place so that people can enjoy that with whatever activities fit best. So that's what we mean by ecotourism.
And so that would tie in with the River Valley Master Plan and make sure that all of those things are taken care of. Along the same line there, we have the development of tourism precincts and create tourism-themed districts. What is meant by a tourism-themed district, and how would we, and again, it's not ours, it's a promote, but what would we do in that area?
So in terms of a tourism district, Other municipalities have had great success with historic districts, or for instance, arts and culture districts, where perhaps they might have a concentration of craft breweries. So those are the sorts of things we would look at. So what are activities that would generate visits to the area? Could be from citizens or residents as well, right? You can be a tourist in your own community, but it would be creating a district where the activities actually build upon each other, again, to create that nice synergy and the fact that you'd like to spend a lot of time there and draws you as a destination.
Okay, so we're looking at developing that through the area redevelopment plans, but then of course working with businesses, tourism, etc., to try to make that happen.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. I will hop out for questions right now. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Okay, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Through, I guess, to Ms. Gehring. Ms. Gehring, something I mentioned in the meeting that never happened, the vision statement. I think it still seems relevant. I think we're keeping the same one. Just for me, it's a bit clunky and wordy. It's future focused. I like to see a vision statement talking about having achieved what we've achieved. So we are working, not we will be working. We are working towards things. So that's my first point. I do appreciate, I think, that the knowledge sector is acknowledged in the document. I don't see anything about the not-for-profit, the volunteer sector, all of that. I'm wondering if that's mentioned elsewhere. We focus on small and large business, I see, but several of those are in a different sector. Is that going to be acknowledged anywhere?
So that's a good question, Councillor Carlson. So when we looked at not-for-profits, we actually looked at them through the lens of being service providers and partners for us, not so much as generating an economic impact, but rather as providing a service. So that may be something that if we're given direction to, we may want to have a look at. I'm not sure where we would go to find some of that information or data, though. It certainly wasn't in any of the plans or studies that we have looked at previously.
Okay, thank you for that. And I do, final question for right now, Your Worship. Ms. Gehring, I do notice that there is a section talking about arts and culture. I appreciate that. I also appreciate tourism being mentioned in the economic section because it is a driver and will be a driver for our economy. But the arts and culture sector also has a big role to play. People seem to always think of it as a luxury, as something that doesn't quite impact the economy. It's kind of it's a nice to have. Why was the arts and culture sector not talked about in the economy section?
Yeah, that's another good question, Councillor Carlson. And I think it's because when we went back to look at all the data that we had gathered, there wasn't much in terms of a local context. So Ms. Hevia Oreo might have something to add as well based on her investigations with rec and culture staff in terms of arts and culture. And as well, I think Mr. Boylan has, there's been a couple of recent developments on the Alberta front in terms of using the arts as sort of being able to generate much more quantifiable impact. I think what you see sometimes is sports has, they sort of have a really good model for determining what the impact is for a particular event or something like that. But perhaps the same hasn't been done for the arts sector. But I'll maybe let Ms. Hevia Oreo talk a little bit about that.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the question. And I agree with you. Sometimes arts is seen as a luxury. And so the question is asked, why is it included in plans like this, or why does it come for funding? The MDP recognizes that arts and culture play a huge part in the quality of life of our residents. However, when the policies were drafted, we, like Ms. Gehring said, we looked at the current documentation we had and what direction that provided. We also built on the current ICSP MDP. And so both sources look at arts, culture, and heritage from the quality of life lens. And so the policies under the MDP reflect that. And we do, as Maureen Gehring, that we do recognize that there is a component that impacts the local economy, but for the MDP, the lens was quality of life. I'll pass it on to Tyson Boylan. Maybe he has something to add.
Yeah, so actually, there's a little bit of research and some work done with this in regards to the economist's name is Todd Hirsch from he's the lead economist at ATB. And he's done a little bit of background research into this as well. And he actually has a podcast, and it's on the latest season of his podcast. So he talks about that if you want to check it out. It's interesting.
Thanks. I'm not one that needs convincing. I guess one of the questions I had was when companies, large or small, are thinking of locating in a community, one of the things they look like and is one of the drivers of them locating in a community is the quality of life for their employees, etc., and families. So I just think it might be necessary to include the arts and our culture in the economic drivers and economic impact. I'm not sure exactly how to do that, but I'd like to put it in your brains for consideration. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Actually, just to follow up on that, Policy 5, especially when we're looking at C, D, and E, and we're talking about support for post-secondary graduates trying to attract potential new industries and employees. One of the things that seems to be absent in mention in policy specifically is youth. And like Councillor Carlson, it's this quality of life aspect. We can create the economic economic foundation for it, but there are so many other things that people consider when they're looking at staying in a community or moving from a community. And so, yeah, I see a greater intersectionality with the economic one than just strictly, keeping these things separate. So, like Councillor Carlson, I have no idea how you can do that, but if that could be examined, that would be appreciated. Thank you. On policy number 5, I did ask this before, but we have to go through the process again. Can I get an explanation of C, D, and E, please, and what their intent is?
So thank you, Councillor Kaufman, for the question. In terms of C, which states include attractiveness to potential new industries and their employees as one of the considerations when evaluating the need for new amenities in the city. And I think that goes to the quality of life comments that yourself and Councillor Carlson were making. So that's where I would see that fitting in. D states support the community's post-secondary institutions in efforts to attract more knowledge-based industries and research. So one of the things that's important there is, of course, the broadband, which Tyson spoke about. So what really do they need to attract and keep the students, young adults that they're educating, to stay here and build businesses, right? So they need a type of environment, so a specific land use that looks at what a business park could be, what sorts of amenities do you need in order to have that creative space, and what sorts of infrastructure do you need to support that. So that's what item D would look at. And item E is the City of Lethbridge will advocate for non-Indigenous and Indigenous graduates of local post-secondary institutions to remain within Lethbridge for employment and entrepreneurial opportunities. And I think there's a two-phase to that. There's a corporate, certainly a corporate lens that we can put to that. And then as well, there's a community lens where you offer support. And I think actually some of the recommendations from the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls study speak quite closely to that. So I think that's tied together there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can I get a definition of knowledge-based industries? What are we talking about when we're talking knowledge-based industries here?
So I think we're talking about things that aren't, for instance, what we typically see, like manufacturing. So these are knowledge-based industries are perhaps things that are looking at e-commerce, where ideas are actually exchanged and floated. There may not be actually something being produced on site, manufactured on site, but yet it's the ideas or the knowledge that is the valuable component of it. I think there's also a technology component too, where perhaps you're seeing something like solar panels, something that's based on an innovation sort of a platform, and we're expanding upon that as well. So.
Okay, thank you. On the tech On the tech side, something like solar panel or wind or geothermal, whatever, I understand that move with the necessity of having a traditional concept of what that business or that sector would look like. And that plays into the nodes. I think in A, we talk about West Lethbridge Employment Center, the central area of the city, or on or near the campuses of post-secondary institutions. But the knowledge economy, and especially since lockdown in March or April of 2020, is happening in our homes, and the necessity for the hard infrastructure in one place isn't what's happening, or doesn't seem to be the experience emerging from other municipalities across Canada. Should we be addressing this idea that knowledge economy requires broadband, high-speed internet, however we want to look at it, being accessible or available at homes instead of considering it in a traditional aspect? But what does that do to planning as well?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting conversation, Councillor Kaufman. There is a lot of debate right now as to whether or not, of course, people will stay working in their homes or whether they will come back to workplaces. We definitely have the broadband pilot that we're introducing, a new utility. So I'll perhaps let Director Hawkins weigh in after I'm done on that. I think you do have to start somewhere, right? And I think the way that the project has been envisioned and the way the grant money is set up, and how the plan is to go forward with a structured utility certainly gives us a good base from which to start from. And yeah, I think there's a lot of considerations when you look at how can we get additional infrastructure to people's homes. In some areas, it's obviously easier than others due to the age of the neighborhood when they were developed. But I'll perhaps let Doug weigh in if he has anything else to add.
Councillor Kaufman, there's no question that broadband is going to play an increasingly more important role in terms of an economic driver, as a building block of innovation and economic expansion in the community, and we've explored that through our Intelligent Community Initiative, and we're actually taking that next step, which is to actually engage in infrastructure investment as a municipality as another means of expanding there. We're happy to strengthen language around that, not only in this local economy section, if council desires, but also in terms of some of the infrastructure sections, policy sections as well. There's no, it would be safe to say that broadband connectivity has become an essential utility, in many ways no different than water and wastewater in the community today, or electricity.
Okay, thank you. I have more questions, but there are public waiting to present as well, so I'll step out. Thank you.
Councillor Crowson?
Yes, thank you. Are the public wishing to present on the local economy that we're on right now, or are they? Because I can step aside for questions if they're linked to this one, or I can ask my questions if they're linked to the next ones.
No, I just wondering, there are public in the gallery and people waiting online to present to council. So we stopped and we said, okay, we'd take questions after each section, but just giving council a heads up that there are members of the public that also wish to present on the topic of the MDP. As long as you're happy to take questions after each and every section, but it's a heads up that this could take quite a while.
I think this is why we do this every 10 years, because it does take quite a while. I actually have some questions about the demographics area, Ms. Gearing, because as you guys have written in there, understanding our community will help us make sure that the rest of this plan responds to the needs as best as possible. And one of the statements made is, in comparison to the rest of the province, Lethbridge has a smaller proportion of its population in what are considered primary working years. Now, primary working years tend to also be the years where people are paying most of the bills of a community, especially property tax, etc. So can you give us some background on why, compared to the other communities in Alberta, we have fewer people in that primary working years? What is it about our age demographics that we need to be aware of?
So that's a good question, Councillor Crowson, and I will have Tyson weigh in after I'm done. I think we do a good job of attracting the post-secondary, but then it's, as we've discussed before, it's those job opportunities and the experiences that they're looking for as perhaps a single person in your young years maybe just aren't as readily available here in Lethbridge. I think we do really well with retaining people who maybe come back to Lethbridge when they have a family, because if we do, this is a great place to raise a family with all the amenities we have. I don't think having that gap in terms of the 25 to 30 some is unusual for many communities. It'll be interesting though, as you say, with COVID and working from home, if that changes. But I think a lot of it for young people is the experience too that they're looking for. I'll perhaps let Mr. Boylan weigh in on if Lethbridge is really much different than other communities. So.
Thank you, Councillor Croson. So yeah, there's quite a large student population here. A lot of it's who we are. There's a lot of the retirement age population as well too. So through attracting more knowledge-based industries and also attracting additional agri-food opportunities, there's a policy as well to try to continue to attract agri-food sector opportunities as well. Try to attract more of that working age population as well too. We're still largely going to be, I think, largely have quite a few students and like families and things like that here, but we're trying to even out a little bit more.
If you're looking at the knowledge base, as an earlier question from Councillor Kaufman, you know, broadband, etc., might be something that would contribute to that development. So we have to think holistically there.
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the things you have again in the early sections is the types of neighborhoods in our community. And you have broken our neighborhoods into 4 types. And from what I see, each type sort of has a type of neighborhood has a plan that goes with it. Are we planning well, replanning well, because some of these are redevelopment plans? Are we doing a good job of planning for our different types of neighborhoods in land use, etc., through the MDP?
So that's an interesting question as well, Councillor Croson. We don't have very many tools in our toolbox to use for older communities. Right now, we look at the core neighborhoods as the ones that currently have ARPs. And I think as we finish those up and move into the mature neighborhoods, that's where it will get a little bit more interesting. And by interesting, I mean that the lot sizes in the mature neighborhoods are actually quite a bit bigger than our core areas. So if we're talking about any kind of densification or looking at any kind of innovative housing types, that might be sort of an interesting journey in terms of those neighborhoods once we get the core finished. Yeah, area redevelopment plans are really the only tool we have. You have a little bit of a gap for those mature neighborhoods. For some of the established and developing, of course, we have used area structure plans, we have used outline plans, because that was when sort of the time was for expanding infrastructure. So I think it's the mature neighborhoods where we sort of have the biggest gap in terms of looking for how they're going to change as we move forward. It's certainly something we're looking at exploring. I think we would like to finish with the ARPs for our core first and then move into that.
And just kind of a follow-up, as we're looking at mature neighborhoods, you're right. Mature neighborhoods tend to have lower density than our core neighborhoods. And so if we are looking potentially at different ways of planning the mature neighborhoods, that could in time help to deal with spreading that density out a bit more. Is that sort of where we'd be thinking of moving if everything goes the way we might think?
Well, and I think too, Councillor Croson, many of those mature neighborhoods also have a little bit of, there's a commercial component in terms of some of the corridors that they're adjacent to. And so how you combine that and how you make that sort of transition between mainly residential to moving towards sort of the higher order roads and perhaps commercial and then sort of your mixed use, that'll be the interesting exercise.
So having said all that, when we get to the housing policies, will what you and I have sort of said be captured in the housing policies?
That may be something that you want to expand on. Certainly, you know, council is seeing these policies as a draft, as a first go right now. This is the only time we've been able to have a discussion. So yeah, if you want to include those ideas and, you know, their support for that, that's something that, you know, we will definitely put in the plan. So
okay. Thank you. I will step out right now.
Okay. There are no further councillors in the queue. So the process that we've agreed on is to go section by section and presenter by presenter and take questions from council. The normal process we have used is to allow all presentations and then take questions from council at the end. So if you're happy going section by section and continuing with questions, we will move on to the next section.
Sorry, if there's nobody else, can I ask a few more questions?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, sorry. Let's look again at some of the policies that we have about economic, particularly number 9, promote improved access between local, national, and international markets by looking at Highway 3. So we have connections to Highway 3, and we also have later policies about the airport. One of the things that I would like to see us discuss is how to better link our different transportation. So we talk airport, we talk highways, we don't link the two enough in my mind. So what could we do around these policies to make sure that any of our transportation, whether it's related to transportation and economic, are intermodal or more than one, and that they're all linked? Was there any discussion around that, around policies?
So that is interesting as well, Councillor Croson, and it might be a discussion to have during the transportation section, because we do have Adam St. Amant will be here as well, supporting us from transportation. And of course, the transportation master plan is being worked on right now. We did have a little bit of discussion about where the airport fit. So in terms of, it is definitely a transportation mode. And we didn't know whether to include it in the transportation section or in this section. So that was sort of a decision that was made based on the information that we had already. I think certainly that will be an interesting discussion, and of course, linkage to transit, linkage to cycling and pedestrian. I mean, it all is linked together, right? But I do think having Adam here to support Tyson and myself with those questions will be a good discussion to have on that day.
Okay, because I just want to make sure that that's linked into finance at some point. The fiscal part there is part of that. And then the other one, I want to go to page 94.
So we have another 14 sections on there. So, but they don't seem to have it out.
94 is policy 15, ensuring that, you know, new growth, et cetera, without skipping between developments. Is this for economic reasons, for environmental sustainability reasons? What was the plan, the idea behind policy 15? Is it just making sure that we build, you know, we don't overbuild on our infrastructure? What's the thought behind this one?
So I will start, and then I will have Byron finish up for me. The thought being here is that we're not stretching our infrastructure availability and resources too thin. So that we are ensuring that, because Lethbridge is a bit slower than other communities, any of you that have been to Calgary will know that it seems like they bring up whole communities of 25,000 people in like 3 years, and with a power center to go along with it. Lethbridge doesn't develop that fast. And so the more we spread out our infrastructure between neighborhoods, the less likely it is that a neighborhood is going to finish. And so that leaves the residents of that neighborhood dealing with construction traffic, dealing with incomplete connections. We have had some issues with fire response for HERF as well, because of the incomplete nature of some of the roadways. And so that was the thought, was how can we better give direction to the development community about what we believe is important, and how can we be looking after the residents of those new neighborhoods to ensure that they're actually getting a good level of service. And so maybe I'll turn it over to Byron, and he can finish up for me.
So Maureen has it right. It's primarily to do with first the quality of life in these neighborhoods. So when you're living in a neighborhood that's partially complete, you're dealing with construction traffic in front of your home or beside your home all the time. You're dealing with dust blowing off of the vacant land beside you and tumbleweeds, those sorts of things. Because you don't have complete road system in front of your house or in the neighborhood yet, traffic patterns are a little bit weird, and you may not be able to get a fire truck to you as quickly as otherwise, or you might experience huge changes in the amount of traffic beside your place when the the major collector roadway in front of your house finally gets looped and connected together. So all of these sorts of things, it may not have enough people in it to warrant school starting in that area, or the school may come late, or maybe a commercial site that's there for the community might not fill in because there isn't enough houses yet to warrant somebody investing in a strip mall in that area. So that's the quality of life part of it. And then there's also a connection to the cost. So imagine that you invest in your house and you buy one house. Well, that's great, and you're paying the mortgage. In Lethbridge, we only have so much development every year. And so if we buy one house and we pay the mortgage on that by investing in all the infrastructure to support that neighborhood, and then we go off and start another neighborhood, we also have to invest in all that infrastructure as well. And so as this goes, the more fronts we have, the more investments we've made, but we haven't increased our income at all. And this is actually another factor that affects the market, because through the offsite levy, we've removed a major obstacle to developers by taking on the risk as the city of those large upfront investments. And so that makes it easier for them to start. And so when many of them are going, then we're just collecting a little bit from each of those fronts. So it's those two factors, quality of life, and then a secondary factor is the recovery of our investments in infrastructure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Just a question or a thought on process, perhaps, for your consideration. I've read through all the correspondence. I know that some of the presenters or people who would like to make presentation are doing so in specific sections. Others have made representations on the entire plan. But if there are folks wanting to present on certain sections, like the economy section, perhaps we could finish the presentation on that, then have the presentations or by any of the presenters, community folks, and then open it up for questions, rather than plowing old ground again if they raise questions and we're back to this section again. Just a thought.
Okay. Councillor Kaufman.
I'm just back in line for questions whenever we get to them, because again, I recognize that there's public that are wanting to do presentations. So if we're going that direction, as Councillor Carlson has just suggested, then I'll happily wait.
Okay, that's kind of tricky to manage. Of just we can do the subsections.
Well, I can ask my questions then.
Okay, well, the other alternative is to let our administration finish their presentation.
Sure.
And then we can ask members of the public to do their presentations and then do questions. So I just noticed that we're getting caught up in questions after every section. It just might be frustrating for the public, that's all.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Ms. Gehring, can you please continue with the presentation?
So thank you, Your Worship. We would be moving on to arts, culture, and heritage, and we'll turn the presentation over to Genesis Havia-Oriel for doing this section.
Thank you. Ms. Havia-Oriel, are you online?
Oh, yes, I was. Sorry, I was talking with a turned off camera and mic. But Janessa, will you go back to the previous slide? Okay,
so we're starting your section now, 5.2, Arts, Culture, and Heritage.
Yes. Okay, everyone. It is my pleasure to share with you this next policy topic. So arts, culture, and heritage encompass many aspects of our city that contribute to the quality of life by activating public spaces and this includes public art, cultural and artistic programming, and our built heritage. To set the context of the policies included under arts, culture, and heritage, I will begin by sharing a few learnings that provided a foundation for the policies. I'll begin with the value of cultural programming. which includes the space of artistic expression and historical and cultural events and experiences. These opportunities are a basis for many in-person and recently virtual community gatherings and contribute to the formation of strong communities and to the diversity of the city as a whole. Maintaining and fostering these opportunities will take strategic action that considers evolving needs of the community, emerging sector trends, and partnerships with advocacy and community organizations. Arts, culture, and heritage has a role to play in the city's reconciliation journey. The artistic work carried out under this context provides opportunities to support the preservation, recognition, and celebration of Indigenous knowledge and histories. These efforts have the potential to make Indigenous people feel welcome and valued while also increasing cultural awareness and understanding within the broader community. While historic buildings are tangible links to the past and efforts should be made to continue the preservation, there are other connections to the past that need to be attended to as well. The Blackfoot people, having continuously lived on these lands for thousands of years, have created a cultural landscape of knowledge, language, story, and ceremony that should be celebrated and shared when appropriate. UNESCO describes cultural landscapes as combined works of nature and humankind that express a long and intimate relationship between peoples and their natural environments. The Oldman River Valley has been described as a cultural landscape because of its special human-nature relationship that existed with the Blackfoot people long before the incorporation of the city of Lethbridge. And this policy topic and the policies within it contribute to the outcomes listed here. Next slide, please. Moving on to the first policy subsection, Arts, Culture, and Heritage Celebration, with the objective to enrich artistic resources, heritage, and cultural opportunities within the community. The objective and the related policies are a result of shared aspirations identified in the documents listed here. These documents speak about working towards inclusion and creating people places for all, enhancing community experiences that lead to greater understanding, continuing collaboration with community organizations and sector stakeholders to achieve mutual goals, and encouraging the recognition and celebration of Indigenous arts, culture, and heritage when appropriate. Next slide, please. The shared aspiration discussed in previous slides set the groundwork for the objective and the general policy direction. This was brought to the committee for a pulse check, and sector advocates, service providers, and the public provided feedback on their hopes and aspirations for the future of the community and how they related to this objective. There was overall support, and the feedback received further informed the policies. We learned that there is support for partnerships for the delivery of cultural programming, including displays of artistic expression, and accomplishing this requires city support in the form of clear policy direction as well as funding options. Artistic and cultural programming delivery has the potential to become a tool to combat racism and discrimination. It is important to highlight that Indigenous cultural programming should be delivered, owned, and controlled by Indigenous people. The policies under this subsection elevate the aspirations of the guiding documents that came before the MDP, and they reflect the feedback of the community. These policies carry forward all of the ICSP MDP policies related to the arts, culture, and heritage, and introduce 2 new policies that apply a reconciliation lens. The guidance that policies provide speak about artistic and cultural city support, cultural programming, and facility needs. Next slide, please. Moving on to the second policy subsection, heritage preservation, with the objective to preserve and share Lethbridge's history for the benefit of future generations. The objective and the related policies were informed by guiding documents listed here, and these documents shared about recognizing and celebrating the contributions of Indigenous people in our community, the roles that everyone can play in sharing the story of the land and the place we call Lethbridge, and the potential tools the city may enact to preserve our history, such as municipal designation of buildings and cultural landscapes. Next slide, please. Building on the shared aspirations, the public and stakeholder feedback received informed the policies in many ways. It was recognized throughout the engagement that the story of Lethbridge begins much earlier than the incorporation of the city of Lethbridge, and the heritage and history of the land known as Lethbridge must be shared and documented when appropriate. We learned that although we were on the right track with the objective and the policy direction, inclusion should extend to underrepresented communities, and efforts should be made to collaborate with them as well. It was also identified that relationship building and collaboration is at the core of learning about and preserving the history of Lethbridge. The policies under this subsection carry forward related ICSP MDP policies, and although no new policies are introduced, they do recognize Indigenous history and apply a reconciliation lens. This concludes the Arts, Culture, and Heritage policy section.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll now move on to relationships. Ms. Gehring, who would?
That's me, Sheila Graham.
Okay, go ahead.
So thank you. So now we're talking about relationships. Lethbridge is an economic, institutional, and service delivery hub for 340,000 people across southern Alberta and southeastern BC, including the 100,000 people, citizens, who now call Lethbridge home. Strong, trusting, and adaptable relationships are needed to achieve important local and regional goals. Sometimes we may be tempted to ask, why do we need to develop a relationship? Can't we just work together on the task at hand? And the answer is probably sometimes. But in many cases, trust and understanding need to be built before any specific outcome can be quickly or easily achieved. I recently heard someone say, change happens at the speed of trust, and trust happens at the speed of relationships. Often we need or want to leverage relationships with partners to help us achieve meaningful participation and input into projects, programs, or services. So how can we strengthen our relationships? One of the answers is by providing a clear picture of how relationships and knowledge shared through these relationships will be recognized and incorporated in our work. To a certain extent, this can simply be seen as good practice in any public engagement, and the city does have a public participation policy focused on individual citizens. In this section, we provide additional direction and insight regarding how we will work with some of our community and organizational partners. Next slide, please. The objective of the policies in this first subsection is intended to remind those working with the MDP to keep the vision and outcomes front of mind. The objective is related to one expressed in Council's strategic plan, indicating an interest in structuring Council committees to support Council's strategic goals. In the same way, the objective here is to align administration's MDP-related work and decision-making to align with MDP outcomes. The SSRP's relationship inventory also suggested developing a tool to assess policies and plans through a variety of lenses, and that concept of considering and incorporating a diversity of perspectives and experiences is reflected throughout the MDP's policies. Next slide. In this subsection, we looked for opportunities to align MDP policies and directions with existing city tools and processes. The Policy Objectives Survey and Indigenous community engagement both highlighted for us that in order to move towards the MDP outcomes, that of a healthy and diverse city in particular, building relationships and understanding needs to be a focus. This is a new subsection, not one that has a direct equivalent within the ICSP/MDP, and it adds a focus on how decision-making can support MDP outcomes. Next slide. The objective of the policies in this subsection is to consider how we work with other local governments in our region to coordinate development. This subsection used the policies in the city that supports the region section of the ICSP MDP as a starting point and brought in new ideas from the 3 additional plans you see listed here. Next slide. In both the Policy Objectives Survey and in conversation with Indigenous partners, we heard about the importance of thinking beyond our artificial municipal borders and to recognize that for many topics, the discussion can't stop at the city limits. To do this, we added additional direction regarding regional collaboration and identified relationships with surrounding nations as a critical area to develop and strengthen. Next slide. In developing the subsection of policies regarding how we work with regional partners, we identified a need for a corresponding subsection talking about local relationships. So the objective for this subsection is similar to the previous one, but this time with a with a local focus. The starting points for policy development included Council's strategic plan and the relationship inventory completed as part of the SSRP initiative. Next slide. It will come as no surprise to hear that the importance of regular and early collaboration with local partners was a message we heard through many conversations. Again, this is a new subsection within this MDP where we think about how local voices, more on the organizational than the individual citizen level, contribute to development in Lethbridge. Next slide. An important decision was made with this plan to intentionally weave Indigenous insights throughout all the sections of the MDP, rather than limiting Indigenous perspectives to one section. There are, however, some specific actions related to reconciliation that are important to address. The objective of these policies is to continue to strengthen relationships and to advance reconciliation initiatives. The guiding documents listed here each contributed recommendations for the development of policies in this subsection. Next slide. And those recommendations were strengthened and enhanced through discussion with Indigenous communities and partners. The policies included here were adapted to reflect recent and upcoming initiatives. They also reflect the message heard repeatedly that shared understanding is a critical starting point for strong relationships. The importance of involving elders and knowledge keepers was emphasized and is incorporated in the policies and directions. This is another new subsection of policies for this MDP, one that reflects the city's commitment to reconciliation. So this is the final policy section we're introducing this afternoon, and I'll turn things back over to our chair to lead the rest of the session.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the presentations from administration. I know there are members of the public that wish to make a presentation on this matter. So each member of the public will have 5 minutes to speak. And following your presentations, council will ask questions of any of the presenters. So I would encourage our public presenters to stay around in case there are questions from council on your presentations. So first, we have Mr. Ian McLaughlin of the London Road Neighbourhood Association. Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, Oki, greetings on behalf of London Road Neighbourhood Association. I want to respond to the local economy section of the Municipal Development Plan, and I just want us to hit 4 issues. The first one was regarding small business. And Your Worship, I had an opportunity, just as we're reliving this meeting, I had an opportunity to relive the document and wish that I could rewrite it, because I said we see nothing in the MDP about the role of small business. Well, in fact, small business appears 15 times in the MDP. But Your Worship, my point was, I didn't look at the community profile. I looked at the policies. And small business doesn't appear once in the 29 different policy topics in the MDP. We'd like to see small business feature in those action verbs: ensure, promote, support small business. Small business is important to all of Lethbridge. It's especially important in the London Road neighbourhood, where a number of our board members operate home-based businesses. We're committed to supporting home-based businesses and small business of all kinds. But of course, those do bring negative externalities, and they need to be carefully regulated to encourage this kind of economic activity, yet not impinge on the existing lifestyle that we enjoy on London Road. Second point, under local economy is neighbourhood retail. We've got a number of interesting, almost iconic examples of neighbourhood retail economic activity right in the heart of our neighbourhood. They work well. They make the London Road neighbourhood distinctive. Spud Nuts, Urban Grocer, and so on. We want to retain those distinctive small-scale retailers, but we're concerned about the impact of increased traffic flows on our narrow streets and in playground zones. So those things need to be considered while supporting neighborhood retail. Policy 27 in the local economy section argues that high-speed fiber optic communications can be improved in the vicinity of the University of Lethbridge, Lethbridge College, and Red Crow College. Well, I really appreciated the comments that I heard earlier from Councillor Kaufman, and we are very supportive of seeing fiber optic infrastructure getting into residential areas. Innovation is not confined to large institutions in the educational sector. There's innovation in the London Road area. There's small business in the London Road area, and those things too need access to fiber optics. Finally, working at home. Your Worship, I don't think I need to tell you that the COVID-19 experience has shown that many occupations are now footloose and people can work at home for all or a significant part of the working day. I'm heading home, and at 7 o'clock, I will be lecturing to students at Peking University Shenzhen Graduate School on the other side of the world. It'll be Tuesday morning for them. So the daytime population of London Road, like many other neighborhoods, has increased. To increase productivity and reduce the load on the city's transportation system for the trip to work, those workers need high-quality communications infrastructure. So working at home, along with home-based occupations and small business, all reasons for improved access to digital communication through fiber optics. We put a premium on that, and I was very pleased to hear Alderman Kaufman speak to that. So we are very pleased that we are looking at public participation in the municipal development plan. I think you'll see members of the London Road neighborhood for the next few days. Joe Secretan should be here tomorrow, and we'll be addressing different aspects of the plan as that relates to the London Road neighborhood. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Okay, I understand Bridget Mearns from Build is online. Ms. Mearns?
Hi, thank you. Yes, I am. There we go. I do have a presentation that I've prepared for you today. Thank you again for the opportunity to present on the MDP and specifically on the local economy section today. On the line as well as Perry Neufeld, who's the president of Build Lethbridge, and he's available to answer any questions you might have after the presentation. Build formed an MDP task force made of builders, developers, and general members to review the policies within this MDP. I would like to say, as one of Lethbridge's largest employers, with over 3,243 jobs, $227 million in wages, in purchases across the entire local economy, and $368 million investments. We are one of the largest single wealth builders for many families in Lethbridge. We would have appreciated having the opportunity to have collaborated a bit on these policies, as some of them, as you'll see with Policy 15, have a dramatic and negative effect. Having said that, we do appreciate the language in the MDP regarding stakeholder consultations and, more importantly, collaboration. We do look forward to that becoming an actual objective in the future. Also, I'd like to appreciate the massive amount of work and time and effort that's gone through this MDP. So thank you, everybody involved for that. Next slide, please. I'll be presenting you today on how investment is actually really made in new areas, talking about Policy 15, the repercussions of the directives on Policy 15, an alternative policy suggestion that actually meets the policy direction, merits of that alternative policy, and then any questions that you might have. Next slide, please. This is a sentence on the top of Policy 15. New neighborhoods shall be substantially complete before the city invests in new areas. I'd like to take the opportunity to be really clear on this. The city does not invest in new areas. Investors invest in new areas through the offsite levy, which is a pool of developers' money, and independent. The city takes over the ownership of this urban infrastructure that's paid for by developers and then maintains it with the revenue generated from the property tax on that serviced land. Next slide, please. looking at a bird's eye view of what actually goes into a development, here's a section of land you can see outlined in red. The arterial roads and the infrastructure that goes to this parcel of land is found between the red line and the green line. That is paid for by the offsite levy. Again, this is offsite levy is paid for by developers through the levy fund at $281,000 a hectare. These are CIP projects that the City Council approves that you have already looked at. And then the individual developer pays for everything else in the green line. That includes the stormwater ponds that you see there in blue, any amenity or park support around those ponds to make the neighborhood nice, a certain amount of parks that's required to be given through the MGA, all the streets, all the sidewalks, all the streetlights, all the grading to make this lots to be developed, to be sold to builders and other people who are looking for land. An investor considers several factors when they decide to invest and develop property. One of them is the offsite levy. The other is the amount of developable land that's left. So once all of those things have been developed, how much land is actually left that can be turned into lots, which actually become revenue generator lots for the city? What's the market demand by the builders? So and also land buyers. Are people looking for lots? What's the current inventory? What is the location of this? Is this by a school? Is this by, say, ATB Center? Is this by Legacy Park? So they look at what's the proximity to other amenities, and then they look at existing infrastructure. Are there already arterial roads going to this property? What would be the impact on the offsite levy? How long will it be before it's anticipated that people will want to move to this part of the town? So a lot, obviously, goes into when and how an investor invests in new development in our city. This is the risk that is shouldered by the developer. Next slide, please. So this brings us to policy 15. We support the objectives laid out here. This demonstrates good fundamental principles of managed responsible growth and the maximization of the developer's investment in infrastructure. On March 1st, the meeting that didn't happen, we did talk about how some of the directives in this policy did not support this actual policy direction, but had some significant unintended consequences for the city, for investors, for home buyers and landowners in Lethbridge. I'm going to quickly just review some of those just to remind you of what they were. Next slide, please. So this directive actually tries to eliminate growth retroactively to only approved outline plans of 2020 and requires them to be complete, then places limits after that to only a few neighborhoods in the city at a time, north, south, and west. Looking at the restriction, you'll see here that it not just concentrates development, but it actually limits it. It restricts it to areas that only have outline plans, regardless of whether there's a logical extension of infrastructure that makes sense. It also blocks residential growth from land that's adjacent to large areas of the city that have been invested in. We brought forward the example of the ATB Center. There's a significant amount of land behind that doesn't have an outline plan that makes perfect sense to be developed in the next number of years to support that ATB Center and the city's huge investment, but also the schools that are there and the businesses. It supports the policy of a walkable city. It makes no sense that something like that would be a barrier. It also has negative impacts on investments that have already been made by investors in our community. So going back to the previous example I showed you where that block of land, that investor has already paid for that land with the idea of using the current policies on when that might be available, when that might be attractive and be developed. So significant investment has been made using current policies, and to retroactively apply them will have significant financial consequence. Also, the direction as they are written contradicts policy 106 on page 151, which promotes a range of choice of new expansion of residential development. Next slide, please. Limiting growth to only 2 outline plans, or in the case in the south is only 1. This limits investment. It doesn't limit growth, it limits investment to specific locations to specific developers and potentially a specific builder group. This concentrates the control in the hands of few and also limits competition. It doesn't recognize that outline plans offer different amenities and different land uses and different product choice. It limits the options and choices for consumers, facing them to look outside of the city. If they can't find what they're looking for in the 2 outline plans that are left, then they will go outside of the city. It takes different time for outline plans to complete. So growth in new areas will be held up until we're waiting for these outline plans to fill in, and more likely than not, those are going to be the expensive lots that are waiting to be filled in, which take a lot longer to fill. This forces future outline plans to become large. If only 1 or 2 are allowed at a time, they're going to be expanding in size, and this creates barriers to efficient development. It also creates uncertain time horizons, which dissuades investors. And it also is contradictory to the policy of objective in the housing policy. The policy framework enables the provision of a range of housing types in different locations throughout the city to meet the varying physical needs and economic circumstances of residents. Next slide, please.
Are we close to wrapping up, Ms. Mearns?
Well, I'm actually getting to the point where we were in March 1st at the meeting. Council Carson and Council Kaufman said, okay, we understand your concerns with this policy. What would a policy look like that can still achieve these objectives that you see here, but doesn't have the negative consequences that I've just explained? So I'll fast forward a bit here, and if you can move to the next slide.
Okay.
So our MDP task force group looked at all of those objectives in the original Policy 15 objectives. So to promote effective and cost-effective infrastructure growth, to discourage skip development, to promote orderly growth in new areas, as well as being alive to the pressures of the offsite levy account and maximizing existing infrastructure investments, we are proposing this, this alternative policy that achieves all of that, but none of the negative consequences that I've just talked about. Next slide, please. So again, the merits of this alternative policy is what you see here. It follows the growth that's staged in the ASP. The new growth areas are the extension of existing investments. The growth areas support an infrastructure master plans that promotes that orderly growth. It supports the city investments in employment areas and service areas like the ATB, Legacy Park, the airport. It allows for discussion and negotiation. It doesn't limit investment where it makes sense. It's responsive to consumer demand and market conditions. It supports Policy 106, which is orderly growth, and it's consistent with the housing policy objectives of consumer choice of type and location. Next slide, please. So I ran through that as quick as I could. I apologize for being so quick on it, but I do feel that I also need to, so I've addressed the concern around investment, hopefully showing that the investment is really the investment and risk of the developer. But to talk about the quality of life is frankly something that I'm quite dumbfounded to hear. Being suggested that living in new areas means you have to put up with construction is quite correct, and I think people who buy in new areas are aware of that. But to put a policy in place that in essence is trying to protect homeowners from haphazard development is frankly false and offensive. And to do with the idea of fire, houses are built in special ways when there isn't fire available to them in a specific time. So I just want to throw those out there, and we're happy to take your questions on anything you have.
Okay, we will go on to other presenters. We do thank you, Ms. Mearns, for the presentation, and there will definitely be questions from councillors, but we will move on to other presenters, and when those have been exhausted, then we will take questions on any of the presentations, including yours. So thank you for the information provided. It's very helpful to get the perspective from developers. Thank you. With that, Mr. Jeff DeYoung. Is Mr. DeYoung here? Yep. Please come forward. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for taking my request to speak here. My reason is for approaching mayor and council is to request a time extension in the general slowing of the NDP process. I guess my perspective is we've had 2 weeks to review this document. It is a very lengthy document, and when you add in together all the sub-documents, it becomes a very onerous undertaking. I am a little bit frustrated that potentially, more than 2 weeks wasn't allotted. There were 800 some people that were allowed to review the MDP last summer, and I'm not sure how it is you get to be on that list, but I think that list should be open to the general public. Some of the issues I do have is I could not locate some of the reference documents on the City of Lethbridge website. The Climate Adaptation Plan, the Corporate Sustainability Plan, or the Integrated Community Sustainable Plan. They're difficult documents to find. And I think in general, what I would like to recognize is that this document is 3 times larger than the previous MDP document. There is no executive summary, and I have not had time yet to be able to understand what changes have been made from the previous document. The larger concern I have is scope creep that could happen to the City of Lethbridge and what the taxpayers ultimately have to pay for. And I suppose those are the touching points I would like to kind of have addressed. I suppose, and I can't remember the circumstance, and I'm just kind of gelling here, I'm a little bit nervous whenever the term partnership gets thrown around in a document like this, because I would hope it wouldn't try to circumvent any kind of tendering processes. And I don't know enough about that to really speak. So I do acknowledge that that I don't understand. And then as well, the reference documents that are used for the MDP, I think some of them I kind of question the validity. The Bike and Pathways Master Plan and the Parks Master Plan, from what I'm able to determine, are 20 years old. They were done by Tom Hopkins when he was the Parks and Rec manager, and he's been retired for at least 10 years. So I don't quite understand this, and I would like a little bit more time to go through it. So that's my plea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. de Jong. I'm sure there'll be some questions. Is there any other member of the public that wishes to speak on this matter? Anybody online? Perry Neufeld? Mr. Neufeld?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much for allowing us to speak today, the opportunity to communicate with you on the new Municipal Development Plan, Bylaw 6265. My name is Perry Neufeld, and I am the Regional Manager for Melcor Developments in Lethbridge. Melcor Developments is a fully integrated real estate and land development company based out of Edmonton, Alberta, nearly 100 years old. We also have regional offices in Red Deer, Calgary, Lethbridge, Kelowna, and the USA, in Arizona and Colorado. We develop, construct, manage, and lease and sell commercial, industrial, and residential lands, assets, buildings, and properties. Over the course of the past 40 years, Melcor Developments has been a partner with you in building the City of Lethbridge and investing well over $500 million in properties and buildings, raw land parcels, and neighborhood developments, including parks, roads, and major infrastructure in the City of Lethbridge. And Melcor values the community building relationship that we have with the city. As a significant stakeholder in land development, our company would like to continue to invest in Lethbridge, and therefore would like to take this time to communicate some of our concerns with proposed bylaw 6265. Our concerns as presented are offered so that we can continue to ensure our community is attractive to investment and the creation of great communities for both our existing and future residents. Our concerns or comments align well with Build Lethbridge's comments, as we are obviously a Build Lethbridge member. We have reviewed their comments and concur with those comments. However, I'm taking my Build Lethbridge hat off now, and I'm communicating to you as the regional manager for Melcor and Lethbridge. And we wanted to make sure that we also took this opportunity to communicate with you directly. Our concerns include the following. Number one, consultation. From our perspective, there was no meaningful collaborative dialogue or conversation with major stakeholders or landowners with respect to the proposed policies contained in Bylaw 6265. As Melcor is a major landowner within the corporate boundaries and committed partner in building the city together, we are disappointed in the chosen process and lack of meaningful conversation regarding the new policies with such an influential and important document such as the Municipal Development Plan, especially in cases where new or revised policies are being proposed or revised to sharply shift the previous direction or philosophy in a specific policy area. Secondly, Policy 15. As this appears to be a growth restrictive policy, we would request that this policy be removed from the document. We believe in a principled approach to growth, for example, discouraging skip-type developments. However, the creation of prescribed growth restrictions that are being imposed in each sector of the city is not a good idea when trying to help promote, attract, and facilitate investment and growth in your community. And trying to artificially control growth and the natural forces of the marketplace in real estate as they relate to those factors such as supply and demand, consumer preferences and choice, and competition, this type of policy will undoubtedly have negative impacts to land valuations and house pricing, further eroding affordability in Lethbridge. As a land developer in the city, we have made many large investments in raw lands based on sound due diligence and good judgment. We also understand that there is always a risk in investing in real estate. However, the impact of the implementation of a policy such as this will negatively impact development timing and model projections on land that was estimated to be in the 5 to 10 year development time frame, and now potentially is being pushed out to 20 or 30 years. This would have major detrimental impacts to land valuations and existing investments that were completed prior to such a policy coming into play. As an investor that has made significant long-term commitments in the purchase of raw lands on the basis of existing City of Lethbridge policy documents, we feel the impact of this new policy would have significant financial implications to our recent land investments that will also affect our shareholders' confidence in continuing to invest in Lethbridge. And thirdly, the Lethbridge Commercial and Industrial Development Study and references to the airport lands and the impact to West Lethbridge Employment Center Area Structure Plan lands. As mentioned in the new MDP, the airport and adjacent lands currently located in the county may be forthcoming in a future annexation. In our opinion, this land will more than likely be well suited to commercial or industrial development and could have an impact on the viability of the development of another large-scale West Side Employment Center located in the northwest area of the city currently. Melcor has acquired approximately 250 acres of raw land in this area of West Lethbridge, and we are now uncertain as to the impact of future airport lands development and our company's ability to market commercial and employment land, dependent on the magnitude and scale, on the west side. Therefore, we are requesting a review and update of the existing Lethbridge Commercial and Industrial Development Study to better understand the impacts of airport land development on the West Side Employment Center. In addition, we would request that the MDP identify the potential for alternative land uses in the West Lethbridge Employment Center area, pending the outcomes of this updated study. That concludes our concerns at this time. Thank you again for allowing us to communicate our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. Are there any other members of the public that wish to make a presentation on this matter? For a second time, are there any other members of the public that wish to make a presentation on this matter? And for a third and final time, are there any other members of the public that wish to make a presentation on this matter? Hearing no other presenters, it is now time for City Council to ask questions of any of the presenters. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you very much, Mayor Spearman. Ms. Gehring, policy 38, 39, 40, and 41 on the issues of inclusion and compassion. I'm going to that spot at the moment. I noticed that they, oh geez, sorry, I'm gonna have to see if I can find it here. I noticed that they all start with 38, 40, and 41 all start with promote. Is there?
So Councillor Kaufman, those are in the community well-being section. Sorry, we haven't really got there yet.
You're right, my mistake.
No worries.
No, well, I'm trying to keep up. Okay. Then I'll step out for the moment, Mayor Spearman. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was hoping Councillor Kaufman was going to talk longer because my MDP draft just closed, so I can't find the right section. Ms. Gehring, going back to something Mr. McLaughlin said in his presentation about small business or perhaps neighborhoods. One of the policies that I can't open right now for some reason talks about ensuring. I'm going by memory. It talks about ensuring sufficient commercial and industrial land. I can't remember which policy that was, but you'd probably remember which it was.
So, Councillor Carlson, in regards to neighborhood scale retail, we have several policies in the places section. So, policy 90, policy 91, policy 99, that all talk about a neighborhood scale of retail and having area redevelopment plans sort of give a governing framework for that to occur. We also talk about a greater mix of appropriate land uses, street fronting and neighborhood orientated commercial development in newer existing neighborhoods. So we may not talk about it in the economy section, but it is definitely mentioned in places.
Right.
In terms of neighborhood retail.
I was wondering, is perhaps in that policy that does talk about ensuring sufficient commercial, maybe, is it possible to reference another policy? Because that one would tie in. I don't know if that's possible, but saying, see also in places.
That's something that may be possible through the implementation section, Councillor Carlson. When we get down to maybe a final document, we could see where there are related policies.
Okay, thank you for that, because it is, if you only look in one section, you may miss something. So that was just a thought. Another question I had, you talk about civic arts in the policies, and I do appreciate that there's a definition provided in the glossary to what civic arts means or is. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to even capture that in the policy section, not just in the glossary, because when it's mentioned that we will ensure, I can't remember which the phrase was, ensure or promote civic arts, what most people will think of is a sculpture, a mural, a piece of art, whereas civic arts, when you look at the glossary, talks more broadly about festivals, events, performances, etc. And so I'm just wondering if there's a way to rather than just using the term civic arts, or maybe even have a bit of a definition, would that be possible?
So I'll turn that question over to Ms. Havia Oreo to address, but I believe it would be.
Okay.
And yes, of course, it would be possible. The reason why it's in the glossary, it's because we don't want to paraphrase a definition and then have something appear as the glossary item, but we can definitely work the definition in a form that very well aligns with the glossary term.
Okay, and thank you. Could you provide that? Is my saying this going to make it happen as a possible amendment, or can you provide me something if I want to move forward with that? Some wording that would be applicable.
So, Councillor Carlson, we're very happy to work with any member of council on an OBR that they would like to put forward in order for council to discuss it. So we definitely anticipate that will happen over the next couple of weeks, because this is really the first time we've had to discuss the policies.
Excellent. Thank you. How long has the draft MDP been in front of our community?
Since February 9th, when it was put on the agenda for first reading.
So nearly 2 months, not 2 weeks.
No.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Final question, if I can, Ms. Mearns, I could not find your presentation that you clicked through today. I had your correspondence, and it was just the one sheet. Is that accessible to us? Have you sent that in? Can I have that? I would love to see your alternative wording rather than just sped by.
Yes, it has been provided to the city clerk's office.
Okay, thank you.
And I would also like to suggest maybe that the presentation I gave on March 1st, it was more than a one-pager, that could also be presented to you.
Okay, well, I'm sure hopefully the city clerk has heard that and can provide that to us. And thank you, Mayor Spearman. I had a couple other questions, but I'll hop out.
Yep, there's lots of people in the queue.
Yep,
I have some questions myself. Maybe to Ms. Gehring, Mr. Neufeld raised the concern about new industrial commercial development around the airport. So my understanding is this is more strategic in the sense that we may want to direct some investors who don't need to be in our industrial park right now, who don't need to require heavy utilities like water and sewer, might be more compatible in an area without that size of development. And secondly, the types of businesses that tend to locate near an airport or on an airport ground tend to be ones that will actually support airports as an economic driver. So if you go to other communities, other cities, you see warehouse shipping and courier type of businesses often located very close to an airport. Is that what we're hoping to achieve as we develop the airport lands, to have more airport compatible, but maybe not exclusively airport compatible businesses in that area?
So, Mayor Spearman, I won't speak for Mr. Kelly as the manager for real estate and land development, but the discussions that we have been involved in do have a portion for airside development. Oh, I think I've frozen. There we go. They do have a portion that is airside, which is what you've talked about in terms of actually having a direct correlation to either freight or something to do with the actual workings of the airport. I think it is important to note that the current MDP actually had an employment area north of 24th and east of 43rd Street. So actually the airport lands replace the area that would right now be considered there. So it's not like we're adding in addition, it's actually a replacement in terms of the south side. Where is an employment center for the south side best located? And so based on the city getting ownership of the airport, that was why that discussion happened there. In terms of West Lethbridge Employment Center, I think it's always a good vision of the city to have employment in all three sectors of the city. I certainly take Mr. Neufeld's point, though, that perhaps there will be an opportunity in the future to relook at West Lethbridge Employment Center in terms of the land uses. Once we go through the process with the county of doing an annexation for the airport, certainly we will be reviewing those studies for the commercial and industrial land use and land supply. And that might be a good opportunity then to have further dialogue with Melcor and Mr. Neufeld in terms of what Lethbridge Employment Center looks like. Certainly the retail landscape with COVID is a little bit uncertain right now in terms of like a big box format. I think we are seeing throughout Canada and North America more focus on warehousing as e-commerce grows. I'm not sure, Mr. Hawkins, if there's anything you'd like to add, but certainly I think the airport lands and the customers or clients that would be going there are a bit different than what we'd see in a commercial location such as West Lethbridge Employment Center. However, there are some changes that are happening in the retail industry currently, and so I think there is opportunity in the future to have a relook at that.
Thank you. Mr. Hawkins, do you have anything to add to that?
I would agree with Ms. Gehring that No, the policies that are in front of council today with respect to either the airport in the local economy section and or any existing land uses that are already in place are always going to be subject to future review depending on changing conditions. I don't believe that there's any conflict in the MDP with respect to the current uses that exist. It's hard for us to speak directly to land uses and or future development at the airport at this time because it is in the county's jurisdiction. So, and again, as you've mentioned, Mr. Mayor, this is a strategic document. It's pretty high level at this particular point, and it doesn't delve into that ASP level or outline plan level of detail at this stage. So those are definitely the future considerations as future more detailed level of planning in the future as well. And again, the MDP in its current form contemplates through the implementation strategy those kinds of things in the future.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Mr. de Jong as well. As a presenter, if you could come forward, please, sir. I'm interested in that you're one of the few members of the public that has come forward. You mentioned the over 800 consultations last year, and we take note of the fact that you wondered how some people were contacted and you weren't. And maybe could you just tell us what your interest is, how it relates to your business or your employment, or what's your specific interest in how the MDP affects you, so we can understand that a little better, what your concerns might be.
Well, I suppose not knowing for certain, but I see the MDP dovetailing with the budget and the CIP documents that are interrelated. I suppose I am a concerned citizen, a small business owner. I guess that's true. But what's not also known is I was an employee of the city of Lethbridge 25 years ago. And back then, there were 800 full-time employees. Now there's 1,800 full-time employees. And I'm kind of worried, without time to review this document, are we just creating this army of public service where we just keep on hiring and keep on hiring, and I don't fully understand the implications of some of the I guess some of these policies and how they will weave back into the city of Lethbridge. So I think that's ultimately my concern.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That helps. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Ms. Gehring, just on the issue of timeline to approval, I think I asked this at the meeting we didn't have, so just asking again. What are we looking at for a destination to approval of this document?
So, Councillor Kaufman, I believe we have a future date in June set aside for another public hearing if need be, if we have quite a few OBRs that actually change the intent of the policies. So we are hoping that sometime in June we can have a final approval for the MDP.
Okay, thank you. So to Mr. de Jong's concern, there is still opportunity then to participate, especially if there's another public hearing, as well as later. Excellent. Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you. Policy, I hate to popping back to policy 8 if we can. And I shouldn't have done that because now I've got to scroll back through my is there a reason why policy 8 is written as promote as opposed to ensure? Since it really does fundamentally talk about us actively going after funding, promote local or regional projects that will benefit the city by obtaining programs, grants, and stimulus initiatives from federal and provincial governments. It's identified as a promote. Why would that not be an ensure?
So I think, Councillor Kaufman, if you were to change the sentence around and say that the city ensure that the city investigate programs, grants, or stimulus initiatives from federal and provincial governments to promote local or regional grants or projects, then I think that would work. We can't insure a local or regional project, right? Because we're looking for somebody else to help us. So I think if you were to change the way it's worded, we could put it as an insure.
Excellent. Did you write down what you just said?
I can do that later for you if you want to do OBR.
Yes, that would be great, because I do have an OBR written, but you've done it much more brilliantly than I have. So if you could go back and review the last 2 hours and 10 minutes of the meeting to find exactly what you said, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
It's a good thing they taped these, that's for sure.
Yes, yes. Policy 181, policies 181 and 184 on page 207. I'm just curious as to why 181 is promote and 184 is support. Because 181 talks about the inclusion of Indigenous voices in decision-making processes. It's a different context. 181 and 184 different contexts, whereas 184 is support collaboration with the Lethbridge Métis Council by exploring opportunities for.
So I think Councillor Kaufman, kind of the same thing. For 181, it would be a corporate decision in terms of ensuring we have Indigenous voices on boards, commissions, and committees. And in terms of working with Lethbridge Métis Council, we would work with them, but they would need to come to the table with us, right? So it's not something that we are in total control of. We could certainly, I don't know, make that an insure rather, or promote rather than support. But again, I think that was the difference for staff. If the very strong language for ensuring was something that we were in control of, that we actually could do and ensure that we were doing, right? So.
Yeah, so it was more of a question of when we're looking at reconciliation, we do talk about both our Blackfoot Confederacy as well as Métis Nation Region 3. So it was about both being promote, but I understand the context around which you're giving it now. Thank you.
So, Councillor Kaufman, if you were looking to change language for anything regarding Blackfoot Confederacy, then perhaps we should also be doing that with the Métis Council.
Absolutely. Okay, thank
great.
you. As policy 175 and 176. 175, promote community-focused planning, service, and program delivery. 176, promote community-focused planning, service, and program delivery. One by strengthening relationships, one by encouraging the use of intersectionality lens. Both of these, as I read this policy, are things that we are looking to do internally to strengthen. What would the difference be between promote and ensure?
So that's an interesting question, Councillor Kaufman. Perhaps I will refer that one to Sheila, just in terms of maybe some additional context she can provide for those two.
Yes, and of course, I'm just looking for my sheet where I would have even better. Oh, here it is. Of course. So thank you for the question. You're wondering about promote rather than ensure. And again, this was a challenge in this section in general. I feel in that in relationships, it is hard to ensure any particular outcome. So certainly we are confident on our end of the bargain, and that we would really like to engage in this relationship. But in terms of ensuring a specific outcome, it really does depend on how the conversations go. Again, there could be opportunity to reword if we were interested in having some ensure language in there.
Okay, thank you. I'll ponder that. Thank you very much for the answer. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. I've asked several questions. If you want to take Councillor Campbell first, I'd understand that.
Okay, Councillor Campbell.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Crowson. Just wanted to ask you, management, to respond to the concerns from Ms. Mearns and also Mr. Neufeld about policy 15 and also You know, one especially the concern if this is implemented, the loss of their investment in there. Can someone kind of give an answer to that concern and your response?
Certainly. So I can start, and perhaps Mr. Bazunas or Mr. Hawkins could also finish up. We certainly understand Bill's concerns in terms of putting a growth regulation in place. I think it is just human nature that when you're running a business, you want to see the least amount of restrictions possible. The way that the MDP process went, we weren't really allowed to collaborate very much with any of our stakeholders in terms of policy development, just because we didn't want policies being out in the community before council had a chance to look at them. We certainly appreciate Bill's language in terms of a couple of things that they shared on that slide about how to make the policy better. From our perspective, we don't have a policy in the MDP currently, and we feel that we need to have a policy in there. We went with what we looked at from our lens. They certainly have a different perspective and lens to bring. And so I think some of the wording that they've used is also appropriate. So that will be left with council to sort of decide where you land in terms of the middle or incorporating language from both or just one.
Okay, Mr. Bazunas, did you have something to add?
Yes, I think in terms of where we went with this policy, we were trying to put something into the MDP because we had a sense that council was interested in putting some constraints around that. And I guess again, we would be we're supportive of what sort of the alternatives that Bill has promoted. For sure, we want to be completing neighborhoods, or what I would call development sectors or nodes. So one of them that's a very clear one on the west side we've invested a lot in is the cell north of Loop Up Drive where the ATV center is, and it's south of Gary Drive all the way to the north where Gary Station is. Filling in that block between Chinook Trail and Métis Trail is something that we've invested by, building Bridge Drive utility corridor across the river, by putting in Métis Trail, by twinning Loop Up Drive. We spent a lot of investment, so we want to see that part of the community fill in, and we want to see them fill in as quickly as possible as well.
Mr. Hawkins?
Mr. Mayor, the only thing I would add to what's been presented today is this notion that and you see that throughout the document, is this theme that the policies are measurable. And a key, one of the things we took a significant effort on was recognizing the competing interests that are at play and the different lenses that are at play. Is whatever we did and whatever we brought forward to council from a policy perspective, we could ultimately gauge through key performance indicators and measure future outcomes. So no policy is not measurable at all if that in fact is the direction that you take. And then being highly prescriptive is obviously quite measurable, but it does come with consequences. So this notion of a middle ground I think is desirable, and that is in fact the purview of council now, recognizing they're hearing several different arguments come into play and different lenses come into play.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Croson.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Ms. Gearing, let's talk arts, culture, and heritage. For some reason, I have an interest in that area. When we're looking at the arts policies, and I know Councillor Carlson spoke a little earlier about this, we are looking at it as celebration. And as mentioned earlier, we need to look at it as well from an economic perspective. One of the things I have heard from members of the community, something that we have to think about when we look at arts as a job, as an economic driver, as something that hundreds of people in our community does. One of the things I know has disappeared over the last few years for various reasons are artist studios. places where groups of artists can work, where they can have those. Is there something we can do that would help provide those spaces, would take away barriers from providing those spaces? Have you given any thought to, are we in the way? Like somehow the city's has barriers? Has there been any conversation around that?
So I think that's interesting, Councillor Croson. In the past, when looking at live workspaces or even artist spaces, depending on the kind of art, there may be some requirements in terms of building code, in terms of ventilation, in terms of things like that. Building code is, of course, a little bit more difficult to try to move around, I guess, in that way. One of the things that we are doing through the land use bylaw review is to have a look at uses. So to have a look in terms of commercial uses, do we have uses put together that make sense in our commercial districts, right? And so that's an interesting one for us with like an artist space. I think it's almost more of like a market driven kind of a thing. I know gentrification often happens to artists where they move into an area because rents are low, and then they start to create a really interesting environment in a place, and then all of a sudden everybody else moves in, and then the artist now must find a new place to go, right? Because all of a sudden their rents go up. So I think it's an interesting dynamic. I'll perhaps let Ms. Heavy Oreo also add into the conversation.
Yes, so this speaks to both what are we nurturing in the city in terms of arts and culture, but also how does the city enable it in terms of a physical space. And like Maureen Gehring said, we do have the land use bylaw that provides this guidance, and I think the gentrification challenges that artists could face in their impact in communities could be addressed through area redevelopment plans. So this is something that we'll talk about and explore on Wednesday when we speak about places. So that's an important lens to bring to that conversation. And of course, I'll be present to answer any questions in that context.
So we could look at it as a policy under that area. Because yeah, we have lost artist studios out to the county. People are driving, several miles out of Lethbridge now because they can find a space there. And that is sad for Lethbridge that has happened. So let's look under now, building heritage preservation. One of the things we have is utilize grant funding to purchase land with cultural and historic significance. First, what grant funding? And how do we see that occurring?
So that's a good question as well, Councillor Croson. I think it's the direction is actually to recognize that we need to be creative in terms of sourcing grants, where they might be coming from. I know provincially we've had a downturn in terms of the funding for historic preservation, and of course Mr. Kilgore is also on the call, and Ross looks after our heritage sort of section of the planning department and is also managing the heritage management plan that is being redone. So I think it is just almost more of a placeholder and an awareness that this isn't anything that we have municipal funds for. We do have to outsource for that.
Yeah, because I was thinking more, advocacy to the other orders of government for grant funding might be a more appropriate statement than looking for it, because trying to utilize something that doesn't exist or isn't in good enough amount might be a difficulty. When we were looking at heritage preservation, we do look at grants, right? When people get heritage preservation, they look at grants. Have we looked at anything along lines of tax credits or anything in those other ways? Certainly American tax credits have supported historic businesses or buildings much better than Canada. And I know we've looked at it provincially and federally, but there is a possibility of municipal tax credits. There are property tax abatements. There's different ways that are used by different organizations across North America. Have we done any investigation into other ways of funding heritage preservation, or do we need to?
So I think that's a question I'd like to throw over to Ross in terms of the update of the HMP, and just to understand if that would be within the scope of that master plan to do.
Thank you, Ms. Gehring. Thank you, Councillor Croson. So financing and the possibility of municipal grants aren't currently in the scope of the Heritage Management Plan update, but certainly we'd be happy to add that to the scope if you'd like.
Well, it's not what I like, it's what myself and 4 other colleagues would like. I don't get to make unilateral decisions, but certainly it's a place where heritage is going now, is how to fund it in a way that actually supports. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Ms. Gehring, just on policy 15, when it talks about the area structure plans, how much land currently held by Lethbridge Land would fall outside of that policy itself? How much land do we currently have that does not have an area structure plan involved with it? You are more than welcome to ballpark me.
So not understanding, not keeping track of what RELD does. I think they may have some land outside of the Watermark area or West Lethbridge Phase 2. I don't believe they have any land in South Lethbridge other than what we own in the airport, if you can consider that RELD. I believe there's a very small amount of land on the north side in the Royal View ASP that we have. So I'm actually not aware too much of the land that they may have outside of an area structure plan. I'm not sure, Byron, based on some of the work that you have done or talked with Build, if you're aware of RELD's land. And of course, we're not aware of anything they may be contemplating either. So,
okay, thank you.
I can't add anything to that. I mean, there is not a, well, there's lots of land out there that's not covered by ASPs. Developers all own. Yeah, you have to ask Mr. Kelly what he owns outside of ASPs. He would be able to tell you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from council? Councillor Kaufman? No further questions?
No, that was leftover hand up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before I adjourn the hearing for today, Council has scheduled future public hearings on the Municipal Development Plan. As a reminder, the schedule is as follows. Tuesday, March the 30th, Transportation, Utilities, Servicing and Environment Policies. Wednesday, March 31st, Community Wellbeing, Places and Housing Policies. And Thursday, April the 1st, Implementation and Appendices plus anything else. It is expected after the public hearing, City Council will consider any proposed directional resolutions for the NDP at a future City Council meeting. If there's nothing further, I now declare the public hearing adjourned until Tuesday, March the 30th, 2021, starting at 4 p.m. In the meantime, I would ask that members of City Council refrain from communicating in any capacity about this matter with members of the public until the vote on the bylaw has taken place. Any member of the public is encouraged to submit or present at a future public hearing that are being held later this week. Councillor Carlson?
Thanks, Mayor Spearman. Just semantics. Are we adjourning or recessing?
We're adjourning according to the city clerk until
okay.
tomorrow.
Just a thought that we were in recess, but if we're adjourning, that's fine. I just wasn't sure about the semantics of it because the public hearing will continue, so it's not really adjourning.
So can I declare it to be adjourned, or do we need a motion to adjourn? No motion.
Councillor Carlson wants recess so he can go play.
I get the swings.
Okay, we're adjourning for today, and we'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock.
See you all tomorrow.
Take care.